Chapter 1, the where, why, and how data collection. In this video, we will cover the different data collection methods used in business statistics. So for the procedures for collecting data, there are a number of ways that the textbook covers, and I'm going to emphasize a few more over others. But first, we'll start with experiments. So an experiment is a process that produces a single outcome whose result cannot be predicted with certainty. So we'll run an experiment and see what happens. Now, in some cases, you might actually have an experimental design. So that's where you'll have a plan to perform the experiment in a way where you're manipulating, changing, or observing a factor to see how it influences some variable of interest. So then we have telephone surveys, which you've probably experienced or heard about. Like examples include political polls, market research, customer satisfaction, healthcare, perhaps your doctor or insurance company calls to check on you. Some of the issues with telephone surveys, as we probably are well aware, is some people screen their calls or hang up. They consider it similar to telemarketers. Or perhaps the respondent isn't home. The other issue is that it requires trained callers. So the folks on the phone collecting the data have to be trained a certain way to make sure good data is collected. Now, what I'll focus more on is on written questionnaires and surveys because they are very similar to telephone surveys. And then also we'll talk about direct observation and personal interview that you might experience in companies or at workplaces. So if we compare telephone surveys to written question surveys, we can see that the process is very similar. We first identify an issue to study, figure out who we want to study, who's the population of interest, come up with our questions, pilot those questions to see how they go, figure out the sample size and a way to select our participants, and then conduct the research. Now, some of the differences between telephone surveys and written questionnaires or surveys is that formatting matters. You need to have some kind of purpose statement up front, because whereas on the phone you can explain why you're doing the survey, a written questionnaire or survey has to have all the information up front, and it has to be compelling enough to make people want to answer the survey. Now, the nice thing is it can allow for more open-ended questions, and we'll talk about what that entails. And another benefit is, or difference, is that it is less expensive. So think about when you receive an electronic or even mailed survey, that's much cheaper than hiring a staff of people and conducting telephone surveys. Now, some of the typical applications, employee satisfaction surveys, so companies like to ask their employees how are things going, or you've probably experienced surveys about a course or about a professor's teaching ability. Then from a consumer perspective, there are surveys related to customer satisfaction, and then of course academic research. So we do surveys to understand human behavior, for instance. Now, some of the advantages are the questions are consistent. So everybody that does the survey gets the same questions. If it's online, you get all the data collected electronically, which makes it much easier to analyze in our different software systems. And it allows for more questions, potentially, because it's easier for people to go through more questions when they have time in front of them via a survey versus over the phone. And some of the disadvantages is responses may not be timely. So think about the last time you received a survey. Did you sit down and do it right away? Probably not. You probably thought about, I'll do this later, if at all, which leads us to potentially low response rates, because when you see that survey, whether it's written on paper or an email, you choose not to participate. And so really our response rates there are anywhere from 5 to 10%. The other issue with written surveys is that there's no one for the respondent to talk to or ask questions. If they didn't understand a survey question, they can't clarify. Whereas on the phone, if you don't understand the question or you need it repeated, the researcher can do that. Now, let's look at the different types of questions that you might see, whether it's phone or written questionnaire. So here we've got demographic questions, and these relate to people's backgrounds and characteristics. So here we have what's your gender and age question, for instance. Then you have closed-ended questions, which are very similar to like multiple choice questions. So here, to which political party do you belong? And there's three options: Republican, Democratic, or another. These are nice because they're easy and quick to answer because it's multiple choice. The downside is if you don't have all the possible answer choices listed, it can make the respondent feel left out if their choice is not listed. And then another type is open-ended. So here's our examples. Why did you choose to attend Maricosta College? So just thinking about that question on your own, what would you say? Would you provide a sentence? Would you offer a paragraph? And that's where open-ended questions can give you a lot of good data. The difficult thing is, well, how do we analyze that data, right? Because there are a wide range of answers that you can receive from respondents. So let's look at some questions. For instance, question A, do you agree with most other reasonably minded people that the city should spend more money on neighborhood parks? Or B, in your opinion, should the city increase spending on neighborhood parks? Which question is better? If you chose B, that's the right answer. The issue with question A is that it's a leading or biased question. It kind of guilts people to think about that it's a good thing to spend more money on parks because it highlights that other reasonably minded people believe so. And if you don't agree, then you're not reasonably minded. So it's kind of shaming the respondent. So you want to be aware of questions like that. In terms of observations, this is another way to collect data. Companies do this frequently. So this is data that's collected from a physical observation, and the data recorded is based on what's occurring. So for instance, a manager could observe workers at an In-N-Out. How fast, how accurate, how efficient are they working at their various stations? The issue with this is it is subjective, as you can imagine. The manager standing there watching the workers might have some different reasons for evaluating people in different ways. And then it is time consuming in that you'd have to be watching numerous employees over several periods of time to really get good data. Now, typical applications would be customer product preferences. So for instance, if you've ever shopped at a Zara, one thing that their employees do is they observe what customers pick up to look at and try on and put back. This allows them to then provide that data back to their headquarters in Spain so they know what make to more of and what make to less of. That way they know what to make more of and what to make less of. Another application would be the rate of seatbelt use. So if you've ever gone through a seatbelt checkpoint while driving, that lets us know if, let's say, Southern Californians are properly wearing their seatbelts. And then companies can use observations to check if people are following safety policies. Here we've got interviews. They can be structured where there's a clear list of questions to ask, or unstructured. So it's more of an open-ended, conversational, let what answers come forward come out. And then typical applications here, customer satisfaction, interviewing suppliers, checking health status. So if you think about the last time you went to the doctor's appointment and had a physical, you were interviewed in that experience. Now there are a variety of data collection issues from a researcher perspective. Make sure to check them out in the textbook. Some examples might be non-responsive bias, so those people that don't respond to your survey, or perhaps selection bias. So as a researcher, what happens if you only select a certain type of person to do your survey? It excludes other types of people. So make sure to review the different data collection issues, and if you have any questions, let me know.